Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man gets a test DNA kit for his birthday, discovers that someone in his family gave him a rare condition. So, would you believe? I got an invitation with my DNA test.
For my 31st birthday, my friends got me a heritage DNA test. One of those where you send a sample and get an approximate percentage of what makes up your background. I don't think there was anything in particular that made them gift it to me, though. I think they ordered one for themselves. Got a 2-for-1 kind of deal. Still, I figured it'd be fun to check out. My biological grandpa died when my dad was very young, and my grandmother remarried long before I was born. So I was never told a lot about that side of the family. I'd always been a bit of a sickly child, so I've been wary about looking too closely at my family and health history. But I figured this couldn't hurt, so I filled out the form, provided the sample, and sent it on its way. Then I just sort of forgot about it. When I finally got the results, it came with a few surprising revelations. While the majority of my heritage was entirely predictable, there was an 11% splash of something called the Northern Scandinavian Blue Hill Tribe. I asked my parents about it. While my mother had no idea what the Blue Hill Tribe was, she was pretty sure it wasn't from her side of the family. My dad was equally confused. Sure, he didn't know much about his biological father, but he knew for a fact that the man was from Oklahoma. His mom, on the other hand, was Minnesotan. Dad got curious and ordered his own test within the hour. As I ended the call and boxed the packaging up, something fell out. A sturdy envelope made of thin navy blue cardboard and sealed with a sunflower emblem. It had a mild chemical smell to it, like a sweet ammonia. At first I thought it was going to be some kind of special offer, much like what got me that test in the first place. But after turning it over, I could see it was addressed directly to me in handwritten cursive that read, "Dear Daniel, congratulations on your recent result. As part of our further effort to explore the diverse world of unified heritage, and in cooperation with our various multinational partners, we would like to extend an invite to descendants of the for an eventful day of education, connectivity, and celebration. Please consider this invitation and review the enclosed details at personal link using your login credentials. We hope to see you there." I didn't know exactly what to make of it, but I decided to check it out. And holy hell, it reeked of scam. Here's what it offered. A fully paid 3-day stay at a hotel in Manchester, New Hampshire. Free entry to the company-sponsored Heritage Celebration event, alongside other members of both the Blue Hill Tribe, but also other unique and diverse backgrounds. There were several groups listed, mostly hailing from the Scans, the Carpathians, and the Ural Mountains. I would have to pay for the trip to get there, though. And they were clear about food, drink, and room service not being included, but all in all, it sounded too good to be true. After several hours of trying to find my way through customer service websites, I finally got a hold of an actual service rep over the phone. At first, they seemed to have no idea what I was talking about. But when I referenced a personal case number at the bottom of the envelope, they referred me to a special events manager. This manager, in turn, confirmed everything.
I know.
They laughed.
I know how it sounds, but this is actually a sort of golden ticket thing. It's a biennial event and part of a charity effort, so there's a tax incentive for us as well. If you can make it, I'd recommend checking it out. We got some event photos on our website for reference.
I did as she suggested, and I gotta say, I was convinced. I accepted. My flight arrived on the morning of the first event day, about 3 hours ahead of opening. I had an uneventful early check-in, spotting the locked doors through the lobby. There were a few posters marking the Heritage Celebration event, and there were already a couple of people roaming the halls outside, but I decided to catch my breath a bit before the doors opened. I got to my room and clocked out for a couple of hours. I double-checked the event schedule on my phone, making mental notes of the various talks, guided tours, luncheons, dinners, and get-togethers. It was a full 2-day event. I was surprised at just how much there was to do, considering the event was intended for no more than a couple of hundred people at most. Still, I couldn't complain. But just as I drifted off for a nap, I got a notification on my phone, a text from my dad. Apparently, he'd recently gotten his results back. Strangely enough, he didn't have any percentage of the Northern Scandinavian Blue Hill tribe in his genetic makeup. Maybe my mom wasn't as southern as she thought. Once the doors opened, there were about 100 people walking about. Some looked like average Joe nobodies. Others were clearly some kind of corporate representative. I could tell at least 6 different accents, just by walking around, and a couple of foreign languages. There were a few booths to check out, mostly advertising various new services and products by the company behind the DNA test, but also one that was just information about various forgotten or unusual tribes. Going through the pamphlets, I couldn't find one about the Blue Hill tribe, so I decided to ask the service rep behind the counter.
Blue Hill?
He said, raising an eyebrow. I'm not sure. Another rep whispered something in his ear, and he nodded.
Right.
He corrected.
We don't have any reading material on that subject, but, I think there's an info session. Should be part of the Tribes of the North meetup.
I double-checked the schedule again and made my way to a couple of events. The Tribes of the North meetup was an after-dinner event. Part of the late-night off-hours socializing thing they tried to get going. I spent the afternoon listening in on various other topics, trying to pass the time. There was a speaker on the topic of nomadic North American tribes, as well as a workshop about forgotten languages. It was all interesting in its own way. But I found myself drifting away just after lunchtime. I had to take a rest around 3 p.m. because of an upset stomach, a relic from my sickly past. Later, I took a walk around town and had a decent meal at a local restaurant before I headed back to the hotel. I was a few minutes late to the meetup. There were about 24 people there in total. We didn't really have any common features. We had different skin, hair, eyes, and we were all from different parts of the U.S. A couple of them were Canadian, and there was this one guy from the Philippines. It was pretty clear who the event organizer was, though. A chipper young woman in a black pantsuit with a company logo pin and a digital clipboard. She went around the room confirming that everyone was a member of the Blue Hill. I overheard an older woman mentioning she was categorized as over 30%, while a young man mentioned he only had 5%. The young woman cleared her throat and excused herself, calmly demanding the attention of the room.
Thank you all so much for coming.
She smiled.
I'm sure you have 100 questions, and we thought this might be a good time to get to know one another a little better. Please follow me.
We were led through a corridor to a smaller open room, a sort of meeting space in the back. They turned down the lights a bit and set out a couple of platters of cheeses, crackers, and some alcohol-free sparkling wine. There were a couple of people there already. I was about to spark up a conversation with a 50-year-old man who looked as confused as me when the chipper young woman took hold of the room again. She directed our attention to a man that I can't for the life of me remember the name of. Weston or Wesley, I think. He in turn welcomed us and encouraged us to indulge in the various snacks scattered throughout the room. Then he introduced us to the topic of the evening, the Blue Hill tribe.
If there is one thing I'm certain of,
He started.
it is that every single person in this room has had a serious medical condition at some point in their life. Something unusual. Does anyone mind sharing an example?
I didn't speak up about the severe ulcers I had as a kid and the partial transplant I had to get. But there were others who openly shared various issues. Heart valve issues, cornea transplants, nerve damage. Everyone seemed to have something. The man just nodded, as if expecting this.
This is sadly a common attribute of people with lineage dating back to the Blue Hill tribes. So let's take a closer look at the history and customs of these unique people. And while we do, please feel free to mark yourself in the attendance sheet.
He continued to speak of a group of people native to the northern Scandinavian mountain ranges. There were dates, locations, an approximate number of tribal members, and a few other sparse details. I marked the form while I waited, realizing pretty early on that what he was saying was suspiciously generic. He spoke of leather and bone craftsmanship, and a belief in mountain spirits, but there were no details, no references, no pictures, drawings, or artifacts. I noticed a lot of people around the room paying close attention and not really thinking too much about what they were filling out on the attendance sheet. But I took a closer look. Our names were already on the sheet, so we were only supposed to make a check mark. However, there were also percentages printed on the side, corresponding to the percentage of heritage we had in common with this tribe. I recognized my 11% and the 30% of the old woman. There was also a series of other numbers that I didn't immediately recognize. When I thought no one was looking, I snapped a picture of it just in case. After a 15-minute lecture on the history of the Blue Hill tribe, I came to the realization that I hadn't actually learned anything. The locations and dates were so generic that there was no way to fact-check it, and there were no details as to their various customs and crafts. Looking around the room, I noticed the chipper young woman was off in the corner, whispering to someone on her Bluetooth earpiece, her eyes scanning the crowd with a serious demeanor. There was a man in a suit by the doorway taking pictures with his phone, and a hotel functionary offering refreshments being turned away. This was clearly a private matter, and of great interest to the company, for some reason. I snapped to attention as the room applauded. The lecture came to an end, and we were given some time to mingle, but not without another reminder to make a mark on the attendance sheet. I chatted a bit with a few people, but it all felt a bit forced. Just a few words here and there. I got the impression that none of us had very much in common. No one seemed to have any idea where that part of their heritage actually came from. There was this one guy who had studied his genealogy extensively, who insisted that it was strictly impossible for him to be even partly Scandinavian.
I've mapped out every family member for 6 generations.
He scoffed.
There's no way.
As more and more people filtered out into the night, I decided to lag a bit to see what was being said behind closed doors. I wasn't sneaking around on all fours like a spy, just lingering a little too long on the other side of a bathroom door, or stopping to conveniently check my email near a hushed discussion. I picked up a few bits and pieces, discussions about our percentages, for example. There was also talk about a second event the following night, and how it wasn't officially on the schedule. They referred to it as a sort of closing ceremony. There was also a short talk about inviting a few of us to a private meeting. I heard 2 people squabbling a bit about the details, and I didn't catch much of it, but I clearly heard a sentence as they finished. "Just get the right ones," one of them snarled.
None of that 3% shit.
I didn't like that, not one bit. Returning to my room, I decided to pack up my things. I had a bad feeling about whatever they were up to, and I couldn't help but to imagine that they had something planned. Maybe it was all a scam after all, or something worse. Either way, I wasn't eager to find out. I couldn't find a reasonably priced flight back home until early morning. It was almost 12 hours away, but I figured I could pull an all-nighter and get out as soon as the sun rose. I could wait a few hours at the airport if need be. With my bags packed and ready, I settled in for a long night. It was somewhere around 2 a.m. when I found myself staring at late-night TV and scrolling on my phone. As a salesman prattled on in the background, a stray thought hit me. I decided to take another look at the attendance sheet photo. There was a set of numbers by each person that didn't make immediate sense to me. I brought out a pen and paper and started breaking them down. First in sets of 2, then individually, then sets of 3, trying to find some pattern or idea. It took me a little longer than I cared to admit to recognize something. The last 4 numbers correlated to one pattern: floor and room number. That left 4 other numbers, which, when broken down into pairs of 2, correlated to a month and day. The date itself didn't make much sense, though. For me, it was a few days after I'd sent in my first sample. Then it hit me. It was probably the day they received the sample. Taking a closer look at the percentages, I could see that everyone with a 9% heritage or lower were situated on lower floors, while those with 10% and higher all seemed to have the higher. Maybe there was a sort of unspoken threshold happening at 10% and up. Could that be what they referred to when they said to get the ripe ones? As I scrolled through various images from previously hosted charity events, I got a notification. My phone warned me that my camera app had unexpectedly closed. Strange, seeing as how it wasn't open to begin with. A bad feeling settled in my stomach. I was on the hotel Wi-Fi. Could they be monitoring our activities? I considered the option that I was just being tired and paranoid. That might very well be the case, but on the other hand, I'd heard what I'd heard. It was stressing me out, further upsetting my already sensitive stomach. I could feel a tinge of pain and decided to go get some ice. Might sound like a stupid home remedy thing, but sucking on an ice cube has always helped me calm down. I followed the corridor, got myself some ice in a bucket, and returned to my room. As I was about to round the corner, I recognized a familiar sound. My hotel room door being closed and locked from the outside. Peeking around the corner, I noticed two people dressed in black disappearing down the hall, mumbling quietly to one another. Returning to my room, I couldn't help but to second-guess myself. Had the bathroom door always been open? Was the same channel on the TV playing? Had someone moved my bags? It was hard to tell. That's how I spent the night, wondering. My heart sometimes skipped a beat as I thought I noticed something new, but ultimately, I couldn't find anything immediately threatening. I pulled out my phone battery just in case and kept it in my other pocket. No one would be tracking me anytime soon. I messed up my bed to make it look like I had slept in it, even though I spent most of my time in the bathroom, ready to lock the door and call the police. I nodded off a few times, but eventually, the sun broke the horizon. A few rays of sunshine slipping in through the frosted bathroom window. I got my bags and left. One nervous elevator ride later, I slapped down the hotel key on the reception and headed for the exit without elaborating. I accidentally made eye contact with the hotel security guard by the exit, who gave me a curious side-eye.
Sir?
He asked. I stopped briefly and excused myself. He held up a hand.
Sir, may I speak with you?
He repeated. I have an appointment, I smiled. Sorry.
It won't take long.
He smiled.
Right this way.
Looking at the silver-colored revolving door that could get me out of there, I considered my options. I could make a break for it, or I could just see what this was about. I decided to just talk to the man, banking hard on it not being anything serious. In hindsight, I should have gone for the goddamn door. I was taken to a small room right next to the reception. There, he asked to see my phone. I showed him, although the battery was still out.
My supervisor had a couple of questions.
He said.
She's just outside. Won't be a minute.
I'm sorry, but I gotta... He pocketed my phone, smiled, and stepped out of the room. But it wasn't an ordinary service personnel kind of smile. It was almost apologetic. Like he knew he'd landed me in some kind of trouble. And through the door came the chipper young woman from the previous night. She wasn't as chipper this time. She didn't sit down, instead opting to stand on the opposite side of the room with her arms crossed. For a solid minute, she just stood there, considering what to say. Finally, she let out a sigh and took a step forward. I felt like a scorned schoolboy, being dragged to the principal's office.
Are you leaving early?
She asked.
Would be a shame to miss the get-together tonight.
I'm thankful to have been a part of this, I said, but I really ought to get going.
Oh?
She feigned surprise.
Family emergency?
That's private, I said. I could still hear hotel personnel outside and figured she didn't want to make a scene. I leaned back in my chair, confident and quiet. She didn't take that too well.
I think it'd be for the best if you stayed a little longer.
She continued. I don't think I will.
I don't think there's much to debate.
I'm sorry, but you have no... She slammed her fist on the table and stared me down, unblinking and furious. There was a slight tremble in her movement. There was no way those outside didn't hear us, and yet no one moved a muscle. Perhaps she was in more control than I'd anticipated.
I think you're gonna stick around for a while.
She snarled.
Or we're gonna have a problem. You wanna have a problem with me?
No, I said, shaking my head. I don't.
Then you're gonna shut the fuck up and play along.
I was dumbstruck. There was no ambiguity here. She was outright threatening me. I could barely understand why. Maybe she'd seen something on my phone while I was connected to the hotel Wi-Fi. Or maybe they'd noticed me spying. Perhaps they saw me pondering the attendance sheet, I don't know. Either way, they weren't taking any chances. I didn't see that hotel security guard again. Instead, they put me in a room with a very quiet man in a suit. He didn't answer any questions, and he wasn't much for small talk. All he did was stand outside the room, checking in on me as soon as I made a noise. I spent all day in that room, this small 10 by 14 feet room with little more than a couch, a coffee table, and the most generic-looking hotel painting I'd ever seen. Still, as calming as that room was, I was freaking the fuck out. But there was nothing for me to do at that point. No harebrained schemes could make me magically phase through the wall. I was stuck there, and I sure as hell wouldn't fight that guy. Didn't take a detective to spot that he was armed. The stress made my stomach act up. I was allowed to use the bathroom, but they kept the stall door open. Then it was straight back the room. I tried frantically to come up with some kind of plan or figuring out some specific turn of the corridor where he wouldn't have a clear shot, but it was useless. There were long, wide open spaces and no harsh corners. But that was my mindset. I was still under the impression that there was something I could do, but in reality, I couldn't. Once that started to dawn on me, I realized how screwed I was. It was the emotional equivalent of sinking into a deep black ocean. It was late afternoon when the door opened. Having spent most of the day napping on the couch and anxiously wandering back and forth, I got on my feet like a soldier. One of the guards coaxed me outside. I could tell something was up. People were rushing past us, speaking into their earpieces. We moved in the opposite direction, but I caught a glimpse of a well-dressed group of people used as human shields for someone very important. I was quickly ushered along. I was taken through the hotel kitchen. They'd cleared out the staff. They took me to what looked like an abandoned old walk-in freezer. I was pushed inside and the door was closed. I don't know how those walk-in freezers are supposed to work, but this one locked from the outside. There were no lights, and I could barely make out what was happening through the little windows. I didn't have to wait for long. Just minutes later, I could hear other people entering the room. Some curious, some angry, some crying. One by one, the guests from the previous night were ushered into the freezer. Even the old woman. Well, not all the guests. Only those ripe enough. There were 9 of us in total. Some were mildly annoyed, others were confused. Finally, they dropped a guy who had been beaten straight onto the floor. He was clearly not okay, trying his best to breathe through his mouth. That set most of us off. Some banged on the door, others screamed at the top of their lungs. No one had a phone or a weapon. The panic rose and it spread like wildfire. Soon I was right there with them, screaming for someone to let us out. I screamed, my voice hoarse, but no one came. We must have been in there for at least 40 to 45 minutes. Our protest died, and in the following silence, we heard someone enter the room. A single set of footsteps. They approached, and we all quieted down. I could see the vague outline of a man outside, but our breaths had fogged up the windows on the door. He had a black suit with a blue tie. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching us. I backed away from the door, and others did the same. No matter how bad the freezer was, there was something telling me that this guy was somehow worse. He was too calm, like this was all normal. He'd done it before. As the door opened, we all scrambled to get back. He stepped into the entrance, obscured by the bad lighting. But for all I could see, he was a man. A little shorter than me, a bit round around the stomach, bald, maybe glasses. There was something reflecting off his face. And yet, there was something about him that screamed danger. The man who'd been beaten was ready to roll the dice. He took off running, trying to push past and get out. There was a kitchen exit not too far away. So if he could just make it past this guy, then maybe he'd be in the clear. But no, he didn't get far. The strange man didn't tackle him or attack or scream. In fact, he didn't seem to react at all. But the runner, well, he stopped a few steps short of leaving the freezer. He clutched his throat, gasping for air. The strange man spoke in a raspy, matter-of-factly voice, as if counting the inventory on a supermarket shelf.
Male, 38 years old, 6-year spread reaching a total of 18%, implant through esophagus surgery.
And then there was this ungodly noise. The runner collapsed to his knees. He was trying to scream, but all that came out was a sort of guttural wheeze. It escaped him in waves, involuntarily, until we could see something poking out of his mouth, like the silhouette of a wet branch being pulled out. Finally, there was a snap as it fully dislodged, and the freezer began to reek of blood. He stopped moving. The panic consumed us. I may read calm here in the aftermath, but in that moment, I was an animal. I was scratching on the fucking walls, trying to get back. I didn't care if I was pushing people to the floor or stepping on someone's head. I was desperate. The strange man spoke again, but this time, his raspy voice seemed better, improved.
Female, 29 years old, 4-year spread reaching a total of 14%, implant through spinal surgery.
One by one, he counted us off. Male, female, male, female. 4 years, 5 years, 9, 8, percentages going up and down. Lung cancer, cornea transplant, dialysis, screams and blood. One by one, being pulled out of the crowd and then pulled apart. I'll never forget the sounds. Small bones sound like carrots when they snap. Bigger ones, and different. The dripping noise as human spillage mixed on the floor. Drops of blood really do sound heavier than water. And with every victim, I could see something shift in our captor. Straight back, deeper breaths, like he was absorbing it all into himself. Taking something back. Harvesting. The sixth person on the chopping block was me. He read it all out loud.
Male.
He began.
31 years old, 24-year spread reaching a total of 11%. Implant through ulcer treatment.
My stomach rumbled, moved, twitched, as if coming alive. It wanted to escape me, to break free. It strained against me. I collapsed to the floor, my hands slipping on the blood, seeping into my skin, itching under my fingernails. Then, I felt something move in my pocket. I almost dropped it. I still had my phone battery. I took it out and held it up to my mouth. I could bite down on it, drenching myself in acid or God knows what. My stomach ceased moving, if only for a short reprieve. I looked up at my captor. See this? I said. It'll fuck us both up. But you need it, right? You need me whole? There was no response. I could just see him tilting his head down at me. Yeah, if I destroy myself, you get nothing, right? That's it, isn't it, huh? I placed it between my teeth, ready to bite down like a rabid dog on a juicy bone. He didn't move as I got up. We circled one another. He wasn't about to let me go. He wasn't looking me in the eyes. He was staring intently at my stomach. He wanted to pull it out of me, to turn it into something else. Or maybe it was part of him all along, something coming home.
No,
he said.
It ends.
He reached out a hand for me, and I bit down without hesitation. To my surprise, there was just a little puff. But that was it. The battery tumbled to the floor, useless. The man instinctively recoiled, but upon seeing that there was no danger, it all came back with a vengeance. The pain was immediate and incredible. Something in me moved, and I immediately spat up a small glob of stomach acid. Then, the battery exploded. It wasn't a big explosion, just a loud bang. Like the starting pistol of a race. I slipped and slid my way out of the freezer, and had to make a split-second decision. I could close and lock the door behind me, effectively sealing him and everyone in there, or I could leave the door open for others to escape. But it wasn't really a choice. Not really. It never is when you get pushed into something like this. I slammed that door shut and let it auto-lock without even thinking about it. Perhaps he'd asked the guards to clear out, I don't know. But there was no one else in that kitchen. I grabbed a knife from one of the counters, burst through the exit door, and disappeared into the night. My stomach stirring like a restless animal, but settling as I got further away. I can only regret what happened to those left behind. It still makes my fucking spine itch. A police patrol found me wandering the streets about an hour or two later. I can't imagine it looked good. I was taking such small, shallow breaths, and I was still clutching a kitchen knife. Not to mention, I was covered in blood. They were convinced that I'd killed someone, but I surrendered willingly and eagerly. I tried to tell a coherent story, but they just didn't understand me. I probably didn't make much sense. A shower and a fresh set of clothes later, I explained my experience at the hotel to the best of my ability. Sadly, it didn't really do much. There were no records of the man I'd described ever visiting that hotel. As for the missing people, those I claimed had been murdered. They had checked out one by one at different hours the day prior, according to hotel records. They might be missing, but there was no indication of foul play. Yeah, I'm calling bullshit on that. So yeah, that was by far the worst time of my life. Looking back at it, it feels unreal, like it happened to someone else. But even now, I can still get little flashes of something that reminds me of that night, and it just pulls me right back. It never really leaves. Whoever that man was, he was important enough to get a whole company to cover for him. I'm sure not all of them knew why they were doing it, but they were complacent. I think we're looking at someone with a lot of resources and a lot of reach. I never got a name, and seeing as how he seemed to change with every victim he consumed, I can't really tell what he looks like anymore. Not even his age or length or weight. There are, surprisingly, some real records about a small tribe of people from the Blue Hill in the Scandinavian mountain range. There isn't much out there about them, just a mention that they worshipped immortal mountain spirits. Others say they worshipped devils. It's a mixed bag. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what I saw, but I am living with the knowledge that a part of me, something inside me, isn't my own. It moves with me. It lives within me. But at the snap of a finger from that thing, and it will rebel. It will fail me. And I'm just at, what, 11%? What happens when I reach 50? Nuru? I decided to post this today after getting a video ad that I could never have anticipated. It seems that this company is still in business, advertising their new generation of DNA tests. I'm sure some of you out there have seen it. 20 seconds, unskippable. Smiling faces, distant families being tied together by CGI blue ribbon. I think they have some of those damn sunflowers in the background, still colored that basic company blue.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man with a love for outer space sees something strange through a telescope that changes his life. So, what did you see the first time you looked through a telescope? Because I've seen the red eyes on Jupiter.
There's this story that my mom used to tell me. When I was a kid, she held me up to a telescope to show me the stars. I'd been born under an open sky 2 years prior. It was only fair that space and I got better acquainted. She showed me constellations like Ursa Major, Auriga, and Orion, and the moon, of course. Finally, she set the telescope to one specific point, Jupiter. Then I started screaming. I went from warm and cuddly to panicked, hell-screaming mini beast at the drop of a hat. Mom never figured out why. For many years, neither did I.
It's like he saw a boogeyman.
She says whenever she tells the story.
Or maybe he just didn't understand what he was looking at. All that mystery can be scary.
My dad jokingly says that this telescope was the cause for my interest in geology. Better to look down than up, he figured. I never thought of it that way. But he had a point. Personally, I think I've always liked to understand the fundamental puzzle pieces that makes this world live and breathe. That's what geology is to me. An understanding of our home. Like knowing the foundations of your house. So yeah, I'm a geologist. I got my degree at MSU, got a master's degree in Norway, and got an entry-level job at a government agency up in Reston, Virginia. By 2013, I was well on my way to earthquake-proofing my life and personal economy. Things were pretty sweet, but there were a few caveats. First, I was desperately lonely. And second, I hadn't used a telescope since that fateful day when I was 2 years old. But that changed in March 2013. I just turned 24. I'd kind of started dating this girl, Lynn. We'd only been out twice, but I had a good feeling about the third date. She was an intensely outdoorsy kind of person. She had all kinds of breathing fabric clothes, super hydro, whatever water flasks. And she tracked everything about her life on her ergonomic hyper-digital buzzword watch, with the accompanying monthly subscription app. It was all a bit much, and I couldn't keep up with her in any sense of the word. But she somehow tolerated me, and that was all that mattered. We'd been hiking all day. Lynn had been hinting at a surprise at the end of the road. It was already getting too dark to turn around, so I figured we might be sharing a tent. She hadn't told me to bring my own. As we got to the top of a hill, I realized I'd been an idiot. There was a camp of 6 other people. Men and women, all variations of Lynn. Eager, sporty people with a violently upbeat vibe. Lynn turned to me with the biggest smile.
Surprise.
She laughed.
We got a stargazing party.
Yeah, I'd misread the entire date thing. I was supposed to bring my own tent, but Lynn figured that was implied. Apparently, you should always bring a tent when hiking. I hate unwritten rules. In that moment, I was just a bitter man coming to the realization that we had vastly different ideas of what that date was going to look like. Still, I had a good time. We had hot dogs and s'mores, and her friends had put up telescopes to play with. There was supposed to be a meteor passing by, and they all wanted to see it. Honestly, I think it was just an excuse to get out of town for a while. One of Lynn's friends had brought a bottle of schnapps. Not much, but enough to play some Never Have I Ever and have a good laugh or two. By the time the meteor came around, we'd almost forgotten about it. Hell, I'd almost forgotten about Lynn. We all got up and took turns with the telescopes. It was sort of magical in a way. All of us standing on that hill, looking up at the clear sky. No light pollution, no passing cars, just a bunch of people and the stars. Then it was my turn. Looking at it through a telescope makes it seem more real in a way. You can see details that you otherwise can't. It reminds you that the stars aren't just a pretty picture. They're real things, in a very real space. I followed the meteor for a few seconds, oohing and ahhing with the rest of them. Then, it passed in front of Jupiter. Something in me stopped. It felt like my soul dropped anchor, locking my neck in place. Ever since that day when I was a kid, I hadn't seen the planet up close, not like that, not since. There was a rumble. At first I thought it was some kind of motor error in the telescope tripod. Then it happened again. I took my hands off the telescope, but quickly realized I couldn't look away. My neck was cramping, my throat closed. I couldn't blink, I couldn't scream. And the rumble grew stronger. It got faster, turning into a vibration or a note. There was a middle note, a high note, finally a low note. 3 repeating sounds, bouncing against the inside of my cranium like an expanding echo. My eyes, searching desperately for a way to blink, finally locked onto something. There, among the swirling storms of Jupiter's surface, I could see spots of red, some large, some small, and one so large it was impossible to miss. Now, I know what it is in theory. I've heard about the storms of Jupiter. It's a gas giant. But what I looked at then and there were no storms. They were eyes, every storm, every spot. Red eyes. I finally understood the rumbling, that feeling that bore through me, middle, high, low. It wasn't just spasms, they were syllables. The more I listened, the clearer they got, like fine-tuning a radio. And in that one perfect moment, as everything aligned, I heard it. I heard Jupiter. I felt it. Not as a voice, but a movement, a trembling bass, like standing next to a silent but deafening song. And it said,
I see you.
For the other stargazers, it looked like I had a seizure. Lynn later described how I took one look through the telescope and immediately started shaking. She offered to get my coat, which I'd left by the campfire. When I finally pried myself loose from the telescope, all I could do was froth at the mouth and screech the same 3 tones over and over. But they didn't understand. How could they? Middle, high, low.
I see you.
I see you. I was only out for a couple of minutes. The circle of friends looked down at me, trying to figure out how bad the damages were. They'd fetched their first aid kits and Lynn's satellite phone. Prior to me waking up, they'd been arguing whether to call someone. They could also follow the blue tape on the trees, which would lead to a ranger station. Luckily, I woke up just in time to stop them. I'm fine, I gasped. Really, I don't know what the hell that was.
That's epilepsy.
One of them said.
My cousin has it.
No, that's blood sugar.
Said another.
Guaranteed.
Someone said something about chakras. Another started talking about the liver and pushing me to eat their special Minnesota sunflower seeds. What a wild night. The next day, I headed straight home. I said goodbye to her, who insisted that I kept her updated. I crashed in my bed, head first, leaving my hiking gear strewn across the hallway. Even though I'd gotten a good night's sleep, my mind needed to recover. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my eyes felt warm. I would also get bouts of strained jaw muscles, sending these fiery signals up my spine to poke me like an infected wound. I slept for 14 hours straight, this long, dreamless sleep, like turning off a light and waking up with no idea what planet you're on. Waking up felt like starting a machine. Something in me moved, and I looked straight up into the ceiling. Without thinking, I said it aloud. "I see you." I tried to chalk it all up to stress and fatigue. I'd been hiking all day and topped it off with booze. Not a great combination. I spent a few hours just looking up stuff about Jupiter to try and explain what I'd seen. I read about the storms, the composition of dust and gas, the invisible rings, the moons. It was all there. Jupiter is no mystery to us. But what I'd seen were no storms. It felt like I'd seen through them, spotting something beneath. Something deep and profound, like breaking through the ice of a dark lake, only to see something shimmering at the bottom. I was at a crossroads. Try and ignore it or confront it. What else could I do? I decided to ignore it. For a few days, it worked. There was the occasional shiver when I heard an uncomfortable tune or the frequency of a machine or motor. There was this one noise that I kept hearing from my fridge that gave me pause. At one point, I just stood there, head pressed against it, listening. Traces of that mysterious rumble, looking to grasp me. Lynn and I kept in touch. She was worried about me, asking me to get checked out. I couldn't be bothered at first, but she made me promise. I thought about telling her I'd gone without actually going, but she was so sincere. I couldn't bring myself to lie, no matter how convenient. The doctor couldn't find anything wrong with me, not physically at least. I kept getting distracted by all the hums. I imagined hearing that frequency, a little bit of everything, directly translating to spotty words in the back of my mind. I could hear C coming off a computer screen, a U from the rumbling pipes in the bathrooms, just spots of recognition, sending flakes of ice up my spine as a constant reminder that I was, in fact, nowhere near okay. It all came to a breaking point one evening when I was making dinner. I was alternating between frying chicken and answering messages from Lynn when I got into what I can only explain as a groove. There was a hum coming from the kitchen fan, which resonated exactly with one of the frequencies. It was calling to me over and over.
You.
I have no idea how long I stood there. My mind just synced to this rhythm. At some point, I realized I was coughing, nodding my head to the alarm from the smoke detector going off. My chicken was burned. I ended up pouring myself a bowl of powdered tomato soup, and even then, as I stirred it with my spoon, I imagined the storms on Jupiter, the red swirls hiding in unfathomable chaos. I watched it spin round and round and round again, and the longer I looked, I could feel the eye coming closer. My hands cramped, locking the plate in my hands. I could feel a rumble boiling in my stomach, like a volcano about to erupt. 3 familiar notes, translating into an immediate, marrow-curdling screech.
I see you!
I threw the plate across the room. It shattered, and the red droplets spread across my egg-white wall. Swirling dots, dancing like distant Jupiter storms. The hum in me faded into a steady stream of whispers. Whispers that eagerly reminded that I was unquestionably seen. For the next few nights, it just got worse. I prayed for a dreamless sleep, but it wouldn't come. Instead, I kept finding myself carried off into the void, coming face to face with an eye the size of continents, chemical storms that could strip the skin from my bones, leaving only thoughts and screams behind, knife-edged ruby mountain ranges circling an endless black iris. No matter how much I kicked, twisted, or turned, it sucked me in, pulling me into an eternal stomach-churning freefall. I would wake up drenched in sweat, completely off balance. I'd fall out of bed and flop around on the floor, as if gravity still eluded. It'd take me a few seconds to realize nothing had happened. And maybe, if I was lucky, I'd gotten half an hour of sleep. I gave up. I told Lynn all about it, begging for help. She came over within the hour, drove me to the hospital, all that. Hell, I don't remember filling out a single form. She made sure they called my emergency contact and updated the doctor on what had been going on. She was unstoppable. I tried not to look and listen too much, and my mind was reeling from a lack of sleep. I have vague recollections of hallways and blurred faces. By then I could feel the rumbling everywhere. Every electrical outlet, every fluorescent light. I could feel it in the texture of my rubber soles dragging across the white linoleum floor. It wasn't letting up. The only clear memory I have is of staring into the eyes of a doctor. As I had a moment of clarity, he looked at me like I'd slapped him.
Good,
he said.
Then your eyes are working.
What?
You can see me, right?
He took down a few notes and checked my eyes.
You said so just now.
They kept me overnight for observation. My mom came by with some supplies and words of encouragement. She stroked my head and made sure I always had a glass of water on hand. Whenever my fever-like rants and seizures would start, she was there to calm me down. Well, to the best of her ability. At that point, I was so far gone that I couldn't even explain it to her. It was just this constant assault on my senses, like my brain was swollen with voices, and then at some point, it stopped. I remember it clearly. Mom had opened a window overlooking the parking lot, and I had a clear view of the night. Distant stars making their way across the sky. After shivering constantly for days, the relaxation I experienced was indescribable, euphoric. This warm, enveloping feeling spread all throughout my body, like becoming a comfort blanket. Mom stroked my hair.
You always liked that,
she said.
Remember, you used to sleep with the window open.
I don't remember that.
No stuffed animals or night lights, just an open window. Anything else and we'd get a nasty tantrum.
She sat with me for a while before she got up to use the restroom. When she got to the door, she turned back to me.
You know, the night when you were born, we never thought you'd make it,
she said.
It was all a mess. The car broke down. Your dad thought we could cut through a field to make it to the hospital on foot.
I know, I sighed. I was born in a field.
The paramedics found us.
She continued.
If it hadn't been for the bright night and the stars, they never would have. It saved your life.
I looked out the window. There was something strangely comforting about that vast darkness now that it didn't fry my nerves. Like a dark sea where you can imagine the waves.
We thought you wouldn't make it, but as soon as we heard them, we knew you'd be okay.
A primal thought swum to the front of my mind. A vague feeling of people around me. Being naked and cold in an open field. Hands grasping me. A voice far above whispering,
"Don't worry, kid.
A breath that lasts for a lifetime.
I see you."
The next morning, I was discharged. My nerves had calmed, and I'd gotten a prescription for seizure medication. I was rolled out of the main entrance, where Lynn met up with us. It wasn't the kind of introduction I'd planned on doing that day, but that time was as good as any. Mom had her promise to take me home, and Lynn was happy to help. We started to drive, and I immediately felt something strange. A tinge of something cold, like a snowflake hitting an open wound.
Do we need to stop?
She asked.
Are you okay?
No, just wait. As I looked around, the feeling shifted, and at one specific point, it disappeared. It just disappeared. I followed the direction with my finger, pointing at something in the distance. Can we go, there? I asked. Right there, that way.
The highway?
Sure, yeah.
To where?
No clue. Lynn pondered it for a second, then nodded.
Highway it is.
We followed it for hours and turned the day into a road trip. We crossed the state line into West Virginia, somewhere in the afternoon, and Lynn didn't seem to mind. She made an adventure out of it. Between my spontaneous bouts of nausea and confusion, I enjoyed her company, not to mention the snacks she got us. As the sky started to darken, I figured she'd have us turn around or look for a motel. But no, she kept going. I could feel the point in the distance shift faster and faster. We were getting closer. There was something there. Something that made the shaking fade and clarity return. A piece of it, settling back to where it ought to be. We ended up going down a long gravel road. Every twist and turn came suddenly, forcing us to crawl at a snail's pace. Lynn didn't seem to mind though. She'd put on some John Denver and had her own little single. "You don't have to do this," I said. "We could be here all night."
That's okay.
She smiled. "You sure?"
A fourth date is a fourth date.
"I'm sure you've had better."
I've had worse.
As the gravel road turned to dirt and came to a stop, I could feel we were getting close. I tried to explain it, but I couldn't find the words. It was like a spot of nothing, growing bigger. If I could just get there, I had this aching feeling that everything would, one way or another, turn out okay. Lynn stopped to get her hiking pack, and that was that. Off we went. We wandered through the wild forest. There were no trails, no leads. It was just us, and a vague sense of direction. Lynn didn't seem to mind. She had both a compass, satellite phone, and all kinds of tools. 2 hours of dark nothing, and suddenly, light. It was almost midnight by then. A starlit sky opened as we stepped onto the top of a short ridge overlooking the lake. I could see almost all the way around it from there. In the distance, I spotted a few boats, fishermen. It was all quiet. No matter the direction I looked, it was all just quiet. I looked at Lynn and laughed. I was so relieved that I couldn't express it. Like a muscle knot untying itself, or a massive headache just melting away. Like putting a soothing balm on my soul. I gave her a big hug and she returned it in kind. I don't know why, but this is it, I smiled. This is it. The spot.
I think we're in, Greenbrier County? That's someplace special to you?
Never been here before.
Well then.
I sat down and took in the scene. No humming, no whispers, no cold creeping along my spine. Just the silent night and distant lights from stars and fishermen.
You want some soup?
Lynn asked.
I got a thermos.
When did you?
Got it in my pack.
She smiled.
Want some?
Yeah, I nodded. That'd be great. She poured me a cup and handed it over. My eyes drifted upwards. Something red, moving across the sky. I shook my head and turned away. My pulse started beating and I dropped my cup of soup. I tapped the side of my head as if trying to realign an antenna. Lynn put a hand on my shoulder.
You okay?
The red in the sky. The red eye. I could feel it. I scrunched my face as hard as I could, telling myself it was all gonna pass. Telling myself it was over. I'd won, and this was just an aftershock. Then Lynn spoke up.
Is that a plane?
She saw it too. I looked back at Lynn, seeing a red gleam in her eyes, a reflection of what loomed overhead. The joy faded from her. She could feel it too. Something was wrong. A reflex in me made me look up. A stupid, inane little reflex. A red swirl in the distant sky. A sailing star. Long out of reach. My breath grew shallow as I realized I couldn't look away. Everything else faded as my sight was slowly swallowed by that distant vision. Lynn! Lynn! I called out, waving my hands behind me. Don't let it take... I felt her fingers brush against mine as the rumbling began. But this time, it was different. It was a pulse so powerful that my left eardrum immediately burst, leaving me screaming like a child on the ground. It burned into my core, wrapping itself around my spine and squeezing, forcing these guttural sounds up through my esophagus. Somewhere far away, I could feel Lynn shaking me, but all I could focus on was that red dot in the sky. It resonated with me. With my every pulse, it pulsed back. Our duet. Our signal. I choked on my lungs, spitting up single syllables like a hiccup. First, C. U. It grew faster and faster, turning from 3 syllables to 2, and gradually, just a sound. First C, U, by C, U. E-O-A-O. Until finally, all that remained was a single word. The name, the signal, the thing. Oh, oh, oh. And with every beat of my heart, the thing in the sky started to turn. I could hear Lynn in the distance, as through a pane of thick glass. I heard her worried, screaming, fumbling to connect her satellite phone, only to be met with a pulsing static. She tried dragging me away, but was shocked with a burst of static electricity. Every hair in my body stood at attention, reaching for the stars, letting every little breeze cut right through me. The red thing grew bigger. That something. A dust particle of the infinite, heading our way. It was a matter of minutes. Using a rope from her pack, Lynn managed to get a lasso hold of my legs. She dragged me away, but it was too late. It was like my nightmares. Something distant and red growing bigger, swallowing everything. Yo, yo, yo. In the moment of impact, something burst inside me. I coughed up something black and viscous. Perhaps it was the connection that tied me to this thing to begin with. Maybe it marked me at birth to demand a favor somewhere down the line. Maybe this was all something cashing in on my life. The sky burned my retinas, but only for a heartbeat. In nothing but a moment, the sky went from burning red to nothing. The ground shook. There was steam, and so much cold air was pushed out that Lynn was knocked off her feet. The red thing was shaped like a wedge. It came down at an angle, roughly the size of a school bus. It tore into the lake, cutting up a wound in the earth itself, effectively cracking a hole in the ground, revealing some sort of cave system under it. In a matter of minutes, the entire lake was laid bare. All water drained into the caves beneath. What little remained of the red thing turned to ash, red swirling ash. Lynn propped me up against a tree. My head was ringing like a bell. My vision slowly returned as the pulse subsided. The black viscous blob I coughed up quickly dried up into a powder, turning into flakes of metal. I tried to talk, but couldn't form the words. I couldn't hear myself. I was so disoriented that my body couldn't understand whether I was breathing or not, making me lightheaded. Leaning against the tree, I forced myself up. I had to see the aftermath. An entire lake, drained in seconds. I could only see little parts of the fishermen's boats, some of which had been blown into the surrounding trees. There was no way they would have survived, much like the remaining fish, flopping about in the mud. I turned to Lynn, trying my best to speak. My body recognized all the physical sensations of speech, but couldn't form the words. Using my fingers, I gave her numbers. I pointed to her satellite phone. We had to call goddamn everyone. The Army Corps, NO, AA, the EPA, the Division of Natural Resources. Hell, I had to call my boss at the USGS. Everyone. We needed everyone. So we called them one by one, and that was that. For me, at least, things were finally at peace. I couldn't feel it anymore. Maybe I'd served my purpose and paid my debt in a way. Over time, my eardrums would heal. Turns out I also had a fractured rib and 2 throat ulcers. Still, I could overcome it. The whole situation was just absurd. There were reports of a small geological event without anyone mentioning the goddamn meteor that changed course to hit us. Coincidentally, there were also reports of escaped convicts. Residents were asked to stay inside. Despite having called literally everyone I could think of, I wasn't allowed anywhere near the site. I got no updates, no debriefing, nothing. The only thing I got was one of the corporate landowners telling me I'd been trouble enough. That line alone tells me they know something I don't, and it bothers me still. But there are only so many brick walls you can beat your head against. At some point, you get too dumb to care. That's where I'm at now. The past few years, I've been able to look into the sky without a twitch of a care. I've looked at Jupiter countless times, and I can't even imagine what I used to see anymore. I know there's something there, but it's like a filter. Something in my mind can't look past it anymore. And Lynn, well, it was her idea to write this down. She thinks there are people out there who might have seen something about this. Other perspectives. We know for a fact that there was a cover-up at the local news station and someone must have been down at the lake. For me, the only thing that still remains in me is that word. That strange sound, meaning nothing and everything. Like something out of a dead language, begging to return. I can say it 100 times, but there's no point anymore. It feels like it is burned out of me. There's nothing left to make it sound true. EO, just a noise. I hope someone out there can make use of the truth, get some kind of closure. As Lynn and I are expecting our second daughter any day now, I feel like this chapter needs to be closed once and for all.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man with a YouTube channel that buy and resell appliances gets a weird washing machine. So, what did you get? Because I got a black washing machine.
My name is Mark, and I run a small YouTube channel where I buy old appliances, fix them up, and sell them at a profit. I run it with my wife Jane to supplement my income. And even though I only have a few thousand subscribers, it is a very rewarding experience. I'm a repairman by trade, and Jane is a sanitation worker. So we see things discarded all the time. You'd be surprised how little hassle tolerance people have. They're so quick to discard anything and everything. So fixing things up and seeing people get inspired by my work has been what got me through the COVID pandemic. Or at least it was, until recently, our first time buying something from out of state. We'd heard about a large sale, just a couple hours drive, where we could get a whole haul of appliances for cheap. It was the owners of a combined restaurant/bed and breakfast who was selling off pretty much everything as the building was being torn down. They weren't going out of business or anything, but they figured they'd get rid of some of their older stuff. Mostly refrigerators and dishwashers, but also a sink or two. I'm an amateur plumber at best, but you shouldn't underestimate the price you can get for a fancy sink. We drove up with a trailer and started elbowing our way forward. There were at least 2 other crews there, along with a dozen cars from curious passersby. We'd gotten there just before 10 a.m., but a lot of the yard was already picked clean. The kitchen stuff was completely gone. What remained were mostly washers and radiators. Sure, there were plenty of furniture and knickknacks, but that wasn't what we were there for. If you got a niche channel, nurture it. As one of the other crews got away with the last industrial-sized freezer, I found myself looking over the washing machines. Most of them were really new and in perfect working order, but there was one who stood out. It had a small note attached to it, simply reading, "Useless," and a smiley face. It was a pretty standard machine, probably from the early 2010s, but it was completely black. The plastic had been chipped and the front hatch was completely broken off. Jane checked it out. It was perfect for the channel. The owner practically gave it away. Apparently the thing came with the building and was already broken. They hadn't cared enough to just throw it out, so they'd put it in storage. The thing hadn't worked for over a decade, so I figured I'd have a lot to do. Still, it looked sleek, and after fixing it up and adding some detail work, we could probably make a nice profit. The color underneath the grime was stunning. Solid black. Beautiful. We also got some smaller appliances for cheap. A cyan-colored 6-slice toaster, a retro-style microwave, and a blender. Had we known there'd be so few things left, we would have skipped the trailer. We hosed off the washing machine, loaded it up, and put the rest of the small appliances in the back of our car. When we got back home, I did a quick checkup on the washer. I usually do a pre-recording check just to see if it is something I think I'll be able to fix. Most of the damage seemed superficial, and I figured I could fix the hatch with a few 3D printed spare pieces. Jane figured she could do something about the color and add some fancy details. In the right room, it could almost be beautiful. Part appliance, part art deco centerpiece. I spent a week fixing up one of the toasters for a shorter video, while we prepped the work on the washer. I was having a busy week at my day job and was fully booked, Tuesday to Thursday, so I didn't have much time to spend on the channel. Fixing up the 6-slicer was a good middle ground, and it turned out great. We decided to keep it, but figured we could probably get at least $90 to $120 for it. Once I signed off the final recording with the usual like and subscribe shtick and got to the editing, I was suddenly excited to get started on my next big project. I had a good feeling about the black washing machine. We could make something good out of it. Jane helped me finish the editing on the 6-slicer, and we got back to work. We started filming the following week. I did the thing where I pretended the washer was donated to us from a fan, and that I'd never seen it before. Then we opened it up and checked the interior. I hadn't actually checked the interior that closely before, and I noticed some glaring issues. There was a lot of gunk clogged up in the inner pipes, and the inlet connections were rusted straight through. The agitator was a bit loose, and there were cracks in the outer hub seal, but the water pump was flawless. I was afraid we'd have to order some special replacement parts, but we got away cheap. I had most of it in stock, or could get it from the hardware store. This thing would be a cakewalk. Over the following days, I made a list of what needed to be fixed, and we filmed it in short burst sessions. We usually just make sort of a montage with some insights along the way for commentary. We talk more about the process rather than the details. But this time we made an extra effort. The whole video would probably clock in at about 25 to 30 minutes. Step by step, we fixed it up, and the 3D printed replacement parts for the front hatch fit great on the second print. The lock worked fine, and there were no leaks in the outer hub or the inlet connections. I got away with using the replacement parts I already had, so we finished it in about 3 days. Jane was trying her best to find a color that matched the original black, but she was having some trouble. We couldn't find what type of color it was from the manufacturer, as this model wasn't sold anymore. It was a Canadian brand from Newfoundland, and I couldn't help but wonder what kind of trip this washer had taken to end up in the backwoods of Michigan. I fixed up the chipped plastic edges with a lot of heat and a lot of sandpaper, and I noticed that the black color seemed to get more intense the deeper I worked the plastic. I showed it to Jane, and she was just as confused as I was. We decided that instead of repainting it, we would just go over the plastic thoroughly with sandpaper and more heat. It was surprisingly easy to work with, and the layer underneath was just solid jet black. Jane worked on adding some Art Deco style flourishes with gold spray, while I fixed it up with some LED lights for the buttons. We prepared for the first test run. We set up 2 cameras and put one of my old t-shirts in the washer. I put it on a low temperature quick wash. We immediately noticed something was wrong. The first thing was the noise. It made a low rumbling noise, like there was a strong electric current running through it. Every 4th second I could hear a gulping sound, like the water was coming in waves. It was a weird sound to hear from a washer, almost like it was regurgitating the water. The biggest problem came soon afterwards. The water was completely black, like ink. The program ran longer than expected, and when it finally finished up, my t-shirt was completely black. Not even gray or some other miscoloration, but completely ink black. We filmed the entire thing, and it made for a pretty decent scene. My surprise was genuine. We ran a second test, thinking we got the gunk out of the pipes, even though I could have sworn I already had. We ran it again, this time using one of my boxers as a test subject. Jane made a joke about them needing a wash anyway, as we watched the washer fill up. Same gulping noises, same rumbling, and the same inky black water. My boxers were rendered completely black. I spent the next 2 days trying to find the problem, running various off-camera tests. Every time I'd get the same result. Rumbling, gulping, then the black water came. I tore the thing apart looking for the cause, but couldn't find anything. By this point, even if there was something clogging the pipes, it should have washed out. The first weird thing I noticed about the machine was when I checked the water coming out of it. It wasn't black. There was nothing wrong with it, it was just black while still in the machine. I was at a complete loss for words. There was something that filtered the water coming in, making it black, and something that filtered it going out, making it regular again. It didn't make sense. There was nothing in the machine that could have caused that kind of effect. I even checked the tubes again, but there was nothing. While running test 14, I put in an old pair of jeans, only to realize my old wallet was still in there. There was nothing in there except an outdated ID and some membership cards. But still, I didn't want anything to get stuck in the washer. We waited for the program to run its course, and unsurprisingly, the jeans were rendered completely black. Impressively so. That's when I checked the wallet. All my old cards, black. This is when I figured something wasn't right. Jane and I decided to pause the recording while we figured this out. Over the following days, I tried replacing several parts, only to get the exact same result. Gulping noise, black water, the whole shebang. I also noticed that the spray-painted details that Jane added slowly started to peel off with every wash, as if the color itself was rejecting it. We tried adding it as plastic decals, paint, spray, but it all just withered and fell off. My LEDs just stopped working. I noticed the washer ran really hot when used. Like, really hot. The plastic was so hot that I could press my hand against it and see the plastic bend to the outlines of my hand. The metal parts in the back were hot enough to fry an egg. Still, it didn't use that much power. It didn't make much sense. We measured the power use during the low-intensity program, and it was surprisingly low, lower than most eco settings on modern washers. I mean, if it wasn't for turning clothes black, it cleaned them really well. By now, I was having a hard time understanding what was going on. One night while Jane was cleaning up the dishes, I fiddled around with one of the black cards I'd gotten from the washer. The black had soaked into the plastic. It wasn't just a coat of paint. An idea struck me, and I went to my computer. The card had an RFID chip, and I wanted to see if it still worked. I got my RFID reader and blipped the card against it. My computer screen instantly blacked out. It wasn't just the screen, though. The entire computer turned itself off. It started to smell like burned plastic, and I stepped away. A few seconds later, a black ooze started pouring out of the DVD tray. The graphics card fan was going crazy, making a high-pitched noise like it was going to explode. Jane freaked out and got the fire extinguisher. I was just frozen. That computer set me back about $1,800 2 years ago, and now it was just sitting there, fuming. My files were backed up on an external drive, but I wouldn't be able to render or edit my videos for a while. I didn't even know what to say to my followers on Twitter. The whole situation was absurd. I just stood there with the black card in my hand as Jane drowned the computer in foam. Jane and I had a long talk. I wanted to get rid of the washer and just not think about it anymore. But Jane figured this could be a break to something bigger. We decided to try things out and keep filming our attempts. Instead of giving up, we doubled down. First, we checked out the manufacturer and sent a few emails. Apparently, they had never sold a black version of this model of washing machine. It was supposed to be eggshell white, and a few were mint green. They'd never sold a black one, though. The customer service people were happy to help us out. They seemed a bit curious themselves, and they asked for the serial number. They told me where to find it. Once I knew where it was easy to spot. It was 8. Just 8. That was the serial number. Just an 8. I had to send a picture to the customer service rep just to prove I wasn't joking. They had a really hard time believing me. They'd never seen anything like it. Meanwhile, Jane was trying to wash different things. Blankets, pillows, sheets, they all turned into a solid, unified black color. Complete coverage. As a joke, she tried putting in a teddy bear. It didn't just turn black, all small plastic parts of it did as well. The eyes, who were small white plastic beads originally, were completely black. Even the stitching and, when checked, the fluff. Every single part of the teddy turned completely midnight black. The eyes didn't even reflect light anymore. They'd turned matte. Exasperated, Jane put the teddy away and threw in one of her old flip phones. I tried to stop her, but she was getting frustrated. "There has to be some sense to this," she said. "Some purpose." We stood next to it during the whole program. Gulping noises, rumbling black water. Once the hatch clicked open, we picked up the old phone. It was surprisingly intact. Solid black all the way through, but the screen still worked. All icons were nameless, along with the background. Jane shook her head. Apparently, the phone hadn't been charged for years. It shouldn't work, but it did. Later that night, just past 2 a.m., I was woken up by a strange sound. It sounded like some sort of bell, but as if run through an underwater filter. It was clear, but haunting. Jane woke up just as I got up. She asked me what the hell was making that noise, and I didn't have a good answer. There were black footprints in the hallway. The teddy bear was gone, and my wardrobe stood wide open. Every single black t-shirt, my black jeans, my black boxers, it was all gone. Pillows, sheets, blankets, everything, gone. The footprints were leading me straight to the washer. The sound was coming from the old flip phone, lying on the bathroom tiles right next to the washer's hatch. A drowning ring signal. I bent down to pick it up, but recoiled. Something inside the hatch was moving. I stumbled my way out of the bathroom and fell backwards. My eyes were fixed on the hatch. It opened. A black hand reached out towards the phone and pulled it into the washer with a snap. The hatch shut and clicked. Jane rushed out with a flashlight. The hatch was lit up, empty. Empty, but there was still something there. I knew it. Something was staring straight into me, and it was angry. We had threatened it, trying to repair it away. This was a way of showing that it was ready to defend itself. I could still hear the wailing bell noise from the phone echoing through the pipes. The next morning, we threw the damn thing away. Jane wanted to destroy it, but I couldn't work up the courage. We got rid of it and hurried back home. The black footprints were still imprinted in the floor, and we had cleaning to do. Once we got back home, I started scrubbing the floors. Jane called me over. At the end of the bed was the black teddy bear, resting comfortably. I don't know what this is or what it means. Is this a warning or a peace offering? Should I get the washer back? I'm at a loss, and Jane is starting to have panic attacks. The footprints just won't go away. Sometimes I swear I can still hear that drowning bell.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man working as private security gets a job that scars him for life. So, no matter what you do, don't visit the Blue Roses and the Old Man.
I lost my job at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. I've worked in private security for years, mostly covering concerts, parades, and the occasional charity event. Needless to say, there wasn't much of any of that in 2020, so I was axed. I had a few backups lined up, but it just didn't pan out. No one was hiring, there was no opportunity for retraining. I could get started on a new education with my savings, but I figured I'd get a chance to come back to work within a few months anyway. Things took a turn for the worse when my mother was diagnosed with bone cancer. Suddenly, my plan to just sit this pandemic out got turned on its head. She needed all the help she could get, and my savings just wouldn't cover it. I needed at least a part-time job to make ends meet, something that gave me time to stay at home and take care of her. While my mom got worse, I spent most of my days at the doctor's office. They had to schedule her for surgery immediately, along with a chemo and physical therapy. I never got a good idea of how bad it was. They wouldn't even say 50-50. Then one day, while I was reading the classifieds, I was getting desperate, a woman approached me. She was in her early 50s, had a very business-like demeanor and short, blonde hair. She made a terrible first impression, looking like she wanted to rip the paper out of my hands and scold me. But that all fell away the instant she smiled at me. All she had to do was flash those pearly whites, and I could suddenly imagine her standing on a porch with a tray of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies.
Excuse me. I couldn't help noticing you were looking through the classifieds.
She smiled.
Do you mind me asking what line of work you're in?
No, of course, I nodded. Private security, ma'am.
Please, Leslie.
She chuckled. She held out a hand, but pulled it back. No handshakes in the pandemic. It was bad enough that she wasn't wearing a mask. Leslie Bolin? I asked. Councilwoman Leslie Bolin?
That's right.
She said, sitting down on a chair across from me.
And you are?
Emmett Marcus, I said. I worked security for many of Councilman Erling's events.
Erling? Then you must have a lot of experience.
I do. She glanced back down at the classifieds, then back up at me.
Erling was quite the character,
she said.
I bet you have some stories to tell.
Not about my clients, ma'am. Leslie gave me a long look. I wasn't flinching. You never talk shit about your clients.
Are you looking for a job, Emmett?
It all looked great on paper. It was part-time, but almost paid a full salary. Some flexible hours during the weekdays. The weekends would be booked solid. I was told there'd be a lot of downtime, and that I was merely a precaution. The only thing that worried me was that I wasn't given a precise location or even instruction. Two things were clear. I was to bring my own gun, and Councilwoman Bolin wasn't the one in need of protection. A few days later, I was invited to her home. I knew for a fact that she had a big family. I'd seen it on the posters around town back in her campaigning days. Still, as soon as I got to her house, I noticed something was off. The lawn wasn't cut, and there was only one car in the driveway. All the curtains were closed. As I parked my car, I saw Leslie standing in the doorway to greet me.
Sorry about the mess,
she said as I walked up to her.
I'm really counting on your discretion here.
She said it jokingly, but I had the feeling there was more to it. I just smiled back at her. Of course, Leslie. She showed me inside, and my concerns grew. Stacked takeout boxes littered the living room, and there were at least 8 empty wine bottles on the kitchen counter. I found myself blowing away fruit flies every few seconds, and I didn't even want to know what lurked under the carpets.
I'll be honest.
She said.
It's been a rough couple of weeks.
I understand, I said, trying to keep a straight face.
I'm separating from my husband.
She sighed.
Not publicly, yet. But it's happening. The kids are staying with him.
That's rough.
Yeah.
She nodded.
Rough.
I caught her eyes wandering off down the hall. She started walking, nodding for me to come along. We stopped outside the downstairs bedroom. A dry four-leaf clover hung above the door. Some sort of childhood memorabilia. There was a flowery smell coming from the other side of the door, and I could hear a faint whooshing sound. Across the door was also the only new thing in this entire house. A sturdy bolt lock. It was installed to keep someone inside from coming out. That much was obvious.
I'll explain in a second.
She said.
Just be respectful.
Of course. The room was illuminated by nothing but a slit in the window. The room had a single window with some sort of metal sheet screwed across, allowing only a sliver of light inside. The room itself was sparsely decorated. Nothing but a queen-sized bed, a closet, an old mirror, and a bedside table. The whooshing sound was coming from a rotating ceiling fan, and the flowery smell was coming from the floor on the right side of the bed. Dozens of roses, so dry they were practically mummified. Still, it covered the room in a nice smell, covering up the smell of the one laying in the bed. Someone lying across from the old mirror, able to see themselves all the hours of the day. It was a very, very old man. He looked to be well past 90 years old, hairless, withered away, and barely breathing. There were no machines hooked up to him, no medication on the bedside table. Just closed eyes, shallow breaths, and practically no muscle left on his body. He stank of sweat and ammonia.
My dad, Oliver.
She said,
This is why you're here.
I think a nurse might be more appropriate. I'm not sure I can be of much use.
I don't need a nurse,
said Leslie, locking my eyes to hers.
I'm taking care of him. What I need is someone to make sure he and I are safe.
Are you expecting trouble?
All I need you to do is check in on him every 30 minutes or so. Be sure to turn on the light, or you won't see him breathing.
I'm sorry, but I need you to answer the question, I insisted. I can't help you if you're not telling me the full story.
He gets up sometimes,
sighed Leslie.
He gets up and he gets out, and he can get himself hurt.
This still sounds like the job for a nurse.
Do you want the job or not, Emmett?
She was dead serious. I wasn't sure about any of this, but I couldn't see any way I could say no. It seemed simple enough. I just nodded.
Good.
She smiled.
And remember to keep the door shut when you're not checking in on him. And if he starts knocking, just don't let him out. I'll deal with it when I get home.
I looked back on the door bolt. There was no way he was getting out without smashing the door or tearing the metal sheet off the window. And looking at those decrepit arms, I didn't expect that to happen any time soon. It became clear that Leslie just needed me during her off hours, while she was off at work. Apparently, she was having some sort of legal spat with a pharmaceutical company, and she had to work uncomfortable hours at times. I found it strange that I couldn't find anything about it in the local papers, and even stranger that she refused to talk about it. The only pharmaceutical company that even had a branch nearby had been shut down for decades. That first weekend with the elderly Oliver Boland was the worst. I was to come in every night from Thursday to Sunday, about 5 hours at a time. I did exactly as I was told. I put a chair in the hallway and made sure to check the room at least once every 30 minutes. Unbolt the door, turn on the lights, check for breathing. That was it, over and over. I got so bored out of my mind that I started bringing pocketbooks to read on my Saturday shift. I didn't even bother hiding it, and Leslie didn't seem to mind. Hours on end with nothing but a close to comatose old man and a whooshing ceiling fan can drive anyone insane. Then came Sunday afternoon. Leslie had just been gone for little over an hour, and I was checking on Oliver for the second time of the day. As I turned on the lights, I recoiled. He was sitting up, staring straight ahead, into the mirror across the room. "Mr. Boland," I asked, "are you okay?" He didn't respond, didn't even look at me. He just leaned back into the bed and closed his eyes. There was something unnatural about the way he moved, almost mechanically. I made a note to tell Leslie about it when she got back. As I was leaving the room, I almost forgot to turn the lights off. As I reached the hallway, I turned around, only to see Oliver sitting upright again. But this time, he was looking at me. It felt predatory in a way, like he'd been caught in the act. I just turned off the lights and saw him lean back into the bed. It was the strangest thing. Even stranger was the roses by the bed. A few of them had turned blue. Leslie came back an hour later than expected, and wet as a dog. She was visibly stressed and seemed scared. She just pushed me out the door, mascara running from her eyes, and told me to come in extra the following day. I told her we should talk about Oliver, but she dismissed me.
I know.
She yelled.
Whatever it is, I know.
I started coming in 5 days a week, Thursday to Monday. It carried on for a little over a month, and I got pretty used to it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was going to see him sitting up the next time I opened the door. He didn't, but it felt like there was always a chance. One night, Leslie was particularly late. I found myself dozing off, only to wake up when my book slipped out of my hands and hit the floor. I'd missed one of the 30-minute checkups. I bounced to my feet and hurried to the door. As I put my hand on the door bolt, I stopped, breathing. "Mr. Boland," I said, "are you up?" There was a short silence, then a footstep. A big one. Not two or several, just one big footstep. Something felt wrong, and I put my hand on my gun. I opened the door. There he was, sleeping as always. Had I imagined it? That night seemed to carry on forever. As it was getting close to 2 in the morning, Leslie was still nowhere to be found. I tried calling her, but I got nothing. Not on her cell, not on her office phone, nothing. I even thought about calling her husband, but decided against it. Instead, I just tried doing my job for as long as I could. At 2:30, I got up to do another check. As I put my hand on the door, something touched my face. I blew it away, thinking it was another fruit fly, when I noticed something touching my hand. A single, tiny blue leaf. Looking up above the door, I noticed the dried 4-leaf clover had turned completely blue. I opened the door bolt and opened the door, only to have it stop against something. There was something heavy on the other side. 2 pushes later, and I realized it was the closet. How the hell did that old man move something that large and heavy without me noticing it? "Mr. Boland!" I yelled out. "I'm coming in!" Step by step, I pushed the door open. I got it to open just enough to see that his bed was empty, and that all the bedside roses had turned blue. Their leaves were scattered across the floor as if someone had stepped on them. I powered through and shoved the door open. Mr. Boland was standing in front of the metal sheet that covered the window. There was a loud pop as the corner screw was torn off. Mr. Boland was just standing there in the dark. The whooshing noise was gone, as the ceiling fan had gone quiet. The lights didn't work, and there were traces of glass spread across the bed. Mr. Boland, his arms were to his side. He wasn't pulling on the metal sheet, but it was still moving. He turned around. His face was stretched to the limit, and something was coming out of his mouth. It was as thick as my arm, and twice as long. A dark, slick surface, like a kind of oil. It dripped onto the floor, leaving blue marks along the way. It was some kind of arm or tentacle. Before I got the chance to speak, the arm split in 4. One grabbed the mirror, one grabbed the bed, and the other 2 stuck to the ceiling. They started swinging forward, holding Oliver Boland like a macabre puppet. It was so fast. All those things moving towards me. Before I could get my gun out of my harness, he was already at the door. I stumbled backwards. The arms reached through the half-open door, only to get stuck by Oliver's frail body. It looked like a snail desperately trying to break free of its shell, or a snake trying to get loose from a bag. Right there in the middle of Oliver Boland's wide-open mouth, I saw something white flashing by, an eye or a set of teeth. My pulse didn't know what to do and just started racing. It got so high that I barely even felt it, and I was forgetting to breathe. I got my gun out, safety off, and put myself in a firing position. It was only then that I realized I had no idea what to fire at. What was my target? That moment of hesitation allowed the thing to close in on me. It threw itself at me, tossing Oliver like a rag doll across the room, knocking over the empty bottles, slipping as it lost grip on the hallway carpet. I just ducked, and as it went over me, we traded places. It was standing between me and the exit. I dashed upstairs, hearing the smattering of something sticky as the limbs scrambled to regain balance. It just seemed so eager to get to me, like it was hungry or playful. Rushing up the stairs, I took a shot. I didn't even know what to aim for, I just wanted it to stay away. I must have hit something. It was a good shot, but nothing happened. Just a large bang. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom and backed away from the door. I heard some kind of squishy noise outside as tiny tentacles were reaching in from under and over the door. It was going to rip the entire door straight off the hinges. As the wood began to creak, I opened the bathroom window, knocking over decorative soaps and porcelain figurines. I was about to throw myself out when I felt something tugging at my leg. I didn't look back, but the smell of ammonia was overwhelming. And in the midst of panic, a voice somewhere deep inside Oliver Bolin.
Hello?
He tried to pull me back. I held onto the window frame for dear life. As my shoe slipped off, I took my chance. I just fell from the second-story window, landing hard on the garage roof. I made big dent in the steel roof, tumbled off, and found myself flat on a gravel path, fresh out of breath. I pulled my shoulder and banged my head, but there was too much adrenaline for me to notice. I stumbled out to my car, threw myself in the driver's seat, and turned the key. As the headlights lit up, I saw Oliver Bolin in front of my car. He was being held up by at least 6 appendages, standing like a crab in the middle of the driveway. His eyes were flickering back and forth, like he was dreaming. As I put the car in reverse, I noticed I was screaming. I hadn't even noticed that I'd started. I was just screaming my heart out, and it wasn't even a conscious decision. I just had to get away, no matter the cost. I don't know if it chased me or if it just let me leave. I don't know what happened for the rest of that night. I just pushed down on the gas and put as much distance as I could between me and that godforsaken house. The next day, I found myself 2 towns over. With my left foot bare, I stopped at a gas station and asked to borrow their phone. I must have dropped mine somewhere during the chase. Probably when I pulled my gun. I still couldn't get a hold of Leslie, and at that point, I didn't know what to do. The whole night felt surreal, like something that had never really happened. Later that day, as I was driving back home, I heard it on the news. Leslie Bolin had gone missing. I just shut up about the whole thing. The pay Leslie had given me had been a bit hush-hush and under the table, and I didn't want to risk ever coming near that house again, for any reason. Besides, what if I'd accidentally shot Mr. Bolin that night? What if I'd just hallucinated? It would be comforting to imagine not having seen what I'd seen, but no, it happened. Not that long afterwards, I heard the reports that Leslie Bolin had been found dead. I think I have an idea of what killed her. I didn't earn much during my time with Leslie Bolin. I've earned enough to scrape by as I look for another job, and I get to enjoy what time I have left with my mom. She is getting progressively worse. I've spent most of my days caring for her in my home. And just a few days ago, the strangest thing happened. My aunt came by to visit my mom. We all had some coffee and cake, talked, watched movies, and spent the day together. Later that night, as my mom had fallen asleep, I noticed something on her bedside table. My aunt had brought her a vase full of tulips, beautiful red and golden flowers, her favorite colors.